O'Neill was unable to attend tonight's session, so in accordance with the CRB policies and procedures authorized by City Ordinance 2021-80, and as the current vice chair, I will preside tonight. At this time, if you can please rise, if you're able, for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please conduct the roll call at this time?
Banks, Collins,
Present.
Tamayo,
Present.
Reyes,
Present.
Guy, Akil, Ingandela,
Present.
Valdez,
Present.
Irvin.
Present.
May the record reflect that 6 of the board members are present. Some CRB instructions before we begin. Please silence all electronic devices. The duties and responsibilities of the Citizens Review Board are to review completed department investigations involving use of force and cases of importance and interest to the community or the city. Determine whether the disposition of reviewed cases was consistent with department policies and procedures. Review matters of importance or interest and make recommendations regarding the handling of these matters. Determine whether any revisions or additions to department policy and procedures are appropriate in reviewing matters of or importance or interest, and report findings and recommendations to the mayor and chief of police. Cases that are brought before the Citizens Review Board are closed internal affairs cases that have been investigated and brought to the police chief for disposition. It is the Citizens Review Board's job to review the cases and render an opinion as to whether the investigation was done according to department policies and procedures. The Citizens Review Board members are provided the investigative files in advance of the meeting. The Citizens Review Board will hear from the department whenever matters of interest or importance are requested for review by the board or the department. The coordinator for the board is Captain Patrick Mesmer. Any person who wishes to make a complaint concerning a matter which may be considered by the Professional Standards Bureau should see Captain Mesmer for information on how to file a complaint. The board should not discuss matters where the city or the department may likely be a party in litigation. Following the agenda tonight, next is the minutes, the approval of the minutes for February 22nd, 2022. At this time, I request a motion regarding the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, Mr. Valdez has motioned.
Second.
And Dr. Collins has seconded. It's been moved and seconded. At this time, is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we shall now proceed with the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising your right hand. Could you do that again, please? Okay. All those not in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay. Let the record reflect. Majority rule. The motion is carried. Okay. Next on the agenda is the public comment. Do we have any public comments for tonight?
There are no public comments for tonight.
Okay, thank you. Let me skip down here. Let's see. You want to go straight to that already?
Yeah, there's no public comment.
Okay. Oh. So we're not going to have a response to the public comment? Okay. Okay, good. Okay, moving down the agenda Next is the approval of the modified rules of procedure.
Good evening, board members. Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I previously provided the board the modified rules of procedure that mirrors the previous amendment modifying the Citizens Review Board according to Section 18-8. I could go over the modified rules of procedures again as a whole in front of the board, but I've provided them previously to the board members, and I'm open for any questions at this time if you have any.
Are there any questions from the board regarding the modified rules of procedure that we all received earlier? Dr. Collins?
I have a couple, and what I'm gonna do is I just put little notes down, and I don't want that. I'm on really the second page, but the first page of the document. And just for my own personal gratification, believe it or not, on number 1, the last 2 sentences, the reconsideration, and from that sentence down to the end, can you just briefly explain to me so I make sure I know exactly what that means? Because that's deviating from our rules going to Robert Rules of Order.
Dr. Collins, which page are you?
It's on page 2. It's the second page, but it's page 2, number 2.
Number two, officers
Roman
in-
numeral 1, the last 2 sentences. Well, not the last 2, but beginning with reconsideration. Just help me understand that. Could be. I just want to make sure I understand.
So
it right.
these rules of procedure are for your board to operate and conduct meetings. These rules of procedures are what you as a board are calling out on how you're going to conduct those meetings. If you don't call out certain procedures, then you have to fall back on the Roberts Rules of Orders. You don't have to mirror the Roberts Rules of Order. You can modify your rules of procedure according to how the board wants to conduct itself accordingly. The Roberts Rules of Order are used as a guide in order to conduct a meeting. But if the board decides to call out a different process in order to conduct a meeting, that's what these rules of procedures are for and in place. And just as you previously have, you're already operating under a rules of procedure. This is a similar rules of procedure. It's just updating it based on the new ordinance that this board is operating under. So these rules of procedure are your tools on the ability to conduct a meeting, and that's what they're here for.
So when it indicate that an application of those shall not apply in the event it's Robert Rules, that would be if that's in conflict with something that's already in the city ordinance.
Right.
Or in our.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just want to be sure. And I won't bother the duties of office. I think I picked that up somewhere else. Said in the event of a tie, what happened, but I'm not going to do that with E. On G, committees may be formed but shall not have the authority to take. The restrictions on G, the committees may be formed but shall not have authority to take any official action or conduct any business on behalf of the CRB. Would that be the committee's prior to bringing whatever the reports are back to the committee?
I couldn't understand what you just said. I'm sorry.
Bottom of page 2G,
Right.
under committee. The restrictions that's being placed there, I said, my question was, what is the restrictions? But it's indicating that the committees might be formed, but the committees have no authority to react on behalf of the CRB. I wanted to understand that restriction that was being placed on the CRB committees.
So on the committees, we don't want to have yet another board that would conduct a meeting and have its own rules or procedures or do business on behalf of the CRB. We want this board to conduct the business of the CRB. So a committee can make recommendations or gather some information in order to be able to present it back to the board for the board to make the final official business to take that action. But we don't want the committee to take that action. We want the board to be able to take that action.
And that's clear. I would want to make sure that as a board, that was clear with us, that if we did send a committee out, that we bring it back here, but it wasn't that we go and get actions and then we can't do anything with it.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what my concern was. There's a comment on page 3, Roman numeral 3, middle of A, under the coordinator's responsibility to report CRB findings and recommendations to the chief of police. Does that still indicate that if we have something that's written that going to represent the CRB, that it will become before us so that we'll be able to know what is going before the chief? Or is that an instance where we ask something to be done? I'm just trying to make sure that if we're having those kind of things that's going to be going out on our behalf, we'll get a chance to peruse it prior to its being released. Is that the case?
Dr. Collins, if you're referring to if the board makes written recommendations to the chief of the police, would you be able to have her response back? That is, yes, you will have her response back to if the board decides to make any written recommendations to the chief of police.
And that's what that A is making
Yes,
reference
ma'am.
to? Okay.
And that's, and again, this is just your Robert's rules on how to conduct a meeting, but section 18-8 is the overall purview of how this board operates. So this is only about conducting meetings, but you still are under your 18-8, your new provision of, that was passed, and that's what the overall operation of this board. So that is still in place. So the recommendations, the written recommendations, that's already defined in the new ordinance that you are currently working under.
Y'all forgive me, but when I read it, I need to make sure I understand it. Let me look at.
And I may be wrong, but I think it's on page 7.
Okay, I'll go back to the question of lead, special meetings, frequent consideration.
The title of that section is recommendations.
Okay, it's a section in here under the meetings and conduct of the meetings. I don't want to deal with that now, but in our annual report, it's a comment also on our meetings. And I just want to make sure that one of the points that we made, and particularly coming out of this pandemic, that in the event there's some extenuating circumstances where we would have the opportunity for those 4 meetings in the community, that we could have the opportunity to modify it. In the annual meeting report, I've made a note of that, and then in this, I kind of mentioned that as well. Maybe it's okay with it, but I just want to make sure that even if it's bad weather or there's a situation, do we have to go back and reschedule that or whatever? I do want to make sure that as we go along, that we remember that we did talk about having some extenuating circumstances.
Are you referring to if there was, like, for example, a hurricane and there's a meeting scheduled and how that would proceed?
And I'm more particularly speaking of those that would be out in the community, because the purpose on going out there is to interact with the community.
Right.
So if there's some kind of natural occurrence that will keep us from functioning and working within the community, or if the pandemic was up high to expose staff and board members and everyone, then I wanted to make sure that some kind of way we make sure we mention that. We talked about it when you were doing our original training, and I just wanted to make sure that I saw some potentials for us to withdraw, pull back, delay meetings of that sort until things like that was corrected, and then we go back out. So whether it's a hurricane or whether it's this, what we've encountering now, the residuals or potential, the full-fledged COVID-19, I don't want to put staff nor board members in harm's way.
I understand. That specific detail doesn't need to be in your Robert's Rules of Order to conduct a meeting. If that were to take place, I'm certain we could coordinate with the council members, wherever the district, that location is, in order to rearrange the meeting if there was something that prevented the meeting from taking place. But we could deal with that when we get to that, if we were to get at that point.
That's fine. We go to page 4, CRB members. I think we've indicated that there was a section on our agenda already. You just covered it, so we can forget that. Because once the public make comments, we have the section where board or staff can comment on it. And I had wanted to make sure that that was kept in. This one I picked up during my other reading. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the city attorney? City attorney, I do have one question. If you can refer to paragraph 4A on page 3 on schedule of regular meetings. I guess I'm trying to understand this specified intent. So if I read it correctly, it is the chair's discretion to determine whether or not the board meets on a monthly, bi-monthly, or up to quarterly.
That's correct.
This is not an issue in which we would bring up before the board, discuss it, vote on it, or?
I understand your question. This is something you could bring up to the chair, but ultimately the decision is up to the chair.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was reading it correctly.
Yes, but ultimately the decision is up to the chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Only because you said that, I didn't answer that one. I said delete it. You was asking about it. I had a question to delete it, but I wasn't gonna bother that. I had if a number of items on the agenda necessitate monthly meetings, and then it says as determined by the chair, they could provide. I was gonna say, should we delete that? Because if we're saying by statute that we're going to meet, and if we have a chair that says, oh, forget the statute, and keep calling off the meetings without coming before the board, that could put us in jeopardy. That was your kind of question, and I had it here too, and I was saying we should just delete that. But I don't feel comfortable with that, I'll say that.
Well, that section also, and even in the ordinance, it says at a minimum, you have to meet on a quarterly basis. At a minimum, you have to meet on a quarterly basis. So it's up to the chair to determine if you're going to conduct it on a monthly basis, but you do have parameters that has to be at a minimum conducted on a quarterly basis. So the board still has to take action, still has to meet.
And prior to that, it was the board's determination whether or not we wanted to move from quarterly to monthly.
This is actually from this is from your original, this is already existing.
And what I'm saying, originally, we didn't, am I wrong? Did we bring it here to the board and the board decide if we were gonna skip a meeting like we did for the holidays and stuff like that?
Well,
Yeah.
you for holidays, we still have monthly meetings, we just changed the date of the meeting. So for example, Thanksgiving, instead of meeting at the last Tuesday of that month, you changed it to another date in order to accommodate the holidays. So you still meet.
What we did is we moved it to the first part of December, which had kept us away from Christmas and away
Right.
from Thanksgiving, which meant we did miss one meeting in that month.
But that's okay.
But it was a board's decision. This, and I was reading that as well, this says that the board don't make those decisions on missing meeting, it's the chair. And we have not done that in the past. Just wanted to, since you brought it up, I just want to make clarity.
But the chair can determine during the discussion, which we always have at the very end of the meeting,
Exactly.
whether we're gonna have
And
we
that I
discuss at the end of every meeting when we're gonna have our next board meeting. It's usually agreed to that we do it monthly. The chair has the right to voice his opinion otherwise.
And I do agree with that. I just didn't agree. This seems like away from the meeting, the chair could make that decision, say, oh, we don't have enough item on the agenda, we're not gonna meet this month.
But if that's the discretion of the chair, he may so choose to not have a meeting or decide that there's not something for the board to conduct a meeting on and to discuss. That is what that provision provides. But at a minimum, you have to meet on a quarterly basis.
I would say if we could bring that back up and discuss it in the future.
Bring what back up?
That,
Well, I'm presenting this today for this board to take action to adopt the rules of procedure.
And we have a quorum.
so if we pass this today, is there any kind of way that it could indicate that the chair, with discussion with the board? Because that's what we're doing. This is actually pulling away the board's involvement at the end of the meeting to say, okay.
I understand what you're saying, Dr. Collins. So at the end of each meeting, the chair discusses when that next meeting is going to take place. If the board as a whole says, you know what, I don't think we should have a meeting, or can we move it to 2 months from now, there's that ability to have that discussion when it's on the agenda, because if you see, it's always placed on the agendas that I've modified for the announcement regarding the next meeting. And ultimately, based upon the discussion of the board, if the chair understands the discussion and the way the board is going, he could decide, okay, based upon the discussion from the board, let's not meet this month.
And as you have in there where in parentheses is as determined by the chair,
Right.
that was in our original
Yes, ma'am.
language and not on a consensus from the board as determined.
It was
by
in the
chair.
original language.
I'll let it slide. It worked for us in the past, so let it continue to work.
I think
Okay,
that's enough discretion.
okay. Thank you. Thank
There-
you.
Are there any other questions for the city attorney? Okay, thank you, Madam City Attorney, for the
And-
presentation.
Thank you. And if we just could have a motion to approve the modified rules of procedure?
I move to approve the modified rules
Okay,
of procedure.
Mr. Tamayo, motion, any second?
I'll second it.
Dr. Collins, second? Okay, we've got the motion and the second. Any further discussion on this motion? If not, we'll proceed with the vote. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. All those against, raise your right hand. The ayes have it.
Thank
Majority
you.
wins. Motion's carried. Thank you. Next on the agenda, items to be reviewed is the selected case, case number 20F as in Foxtrot, -145.
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
Captain Jason Delahaye. I'm currently the captain of the Special Operations Division over at the Police Department. I was assigned this specific case, 20F-145, involving Master Police Officer Randy Barnwell. Synopsis of the case is on November 6, 2020, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office was called to the residence of Master Police Officer Randy Barnwell. When they arrived at the scene, they found the call to be a domestic dispute with both parties having injuries. At the conclusion of their on-scene investigation, Master Police Officer Barnwell was arrested for battery domestic violence. I was assigned the case for review on February 19th, 2021. When I got the case, I thoroughly read and viewed all the documents, videos, and audio tape files contained within the complaint, which included body-worn camera recordings from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. On the video, I noted that the victim had an injury on the right cheek. During the victim's on-scene interview, the victim appeared excited and upset, and the victim relayed to the deputies that Master Police Officer Barnwell and the victim were at Pin Chasers Bowling Alley, drinking with a few friends. They had a few beers and shots, and at some point in time, Master Police Officer Barnwell became upset with the victim and left, leaving the victim at the bowling alley. The victim was able to get a ride home, and an argument began at the residence. Victim claimed to the officers that Master Police Officer Barnwell shoved the victim multiple times and then pinned the victim to the couch. During the interaction is when the victim said that the victim received injuries. During the victim's interview, the victim appears intoxicated, and the deputy's report and statements indicate that. On scene, Master Police Officer Barnwell's interaction with deputies, he appeared calm and initially cooperative. There were obvious scratches on his face, neck, and hand. He told the first responding deputy, he confirmed that there was an argument at Pin Chasers, and then he left. The victim got home and another argument ensued. Master Police Officer Barnwell on scene claimed there was no physical altercation, and he admitted on scene to drinking 4 to 5 beers at the bowling alley. During this investigation, 2 deputies and their corporal tried to interview Master Police Officer Barnwell to get him to tell them how his injuries happened, but he did not cooperate with the portion of that interview, stating that he didn't want to get anybody in trouble. During his interview, it appeared that he was intoxicated also. His speech was slurred and was obviously intoxicated. Master Police Officer Barnwell, after sitting in the patrol vehicle for a long duration, seemed to get annoyed and began speaking unprofessionally with the deputies, and also declined to stay out of the vehicle to have his picture taken when he was removed to adjust his handcuffs. He was subsequently arrested and transported to booking. On January 14th, 2021, the Hillsborough County State Attorney's Office dismissed the criminal battery charges that Master Police Officer Barnwell was arrested for on November 6th. During the internal affairs investigation and interviews, both county deputies recounted the events of that night accurately. The victim, however, changed the victim's story from what was originally told to the responding deputies. Victim advised that the victim told the deputies that Master Police Officer Barnwell pushed the victim because the victim was intoxicated from drinking and was mad. The victim said that the victim lied about the physical part to the deputies to get Randy in trouble, and that any injuries happened when the victim tripped over dogs. During the internal affairs interview of Master Police Officer Barnwell, he advised that he was at the bowling alley with the victim to meet up with friends and did consume alcoholic beverages. He left the victim at the bowling alley. When the victim arrived home, the victim began yelling at him. He advised the only unwanted touching done by him was when the victim was in his personal space and he went past the victim to get out of the situation. After I reviewed all the material contained in the investigation, I found that the exact details of what occurred the night Master Police Officer Barnwell was arrested are unclear. The injuries sustained by both Master Police Officer Barnwell and the victim indicate that something physical happened. However, the on-scene statements made by the victim are contradicted by the victim's internal affairs interview. Formal criminal case was dismissed by the Hillsborough County State Attorney's Office. Due to those circumstances, I was unable to determine a clear law violation. Master Police Officer Barnwell's conduct the night of the incident fluctuated. It began cooperative and calm, but as it was clear he would remain in custody, his demeanor and conduct changed. He became short and verbally agitated with the deputies, swearing and being overly critical of them, and bringing discredit to the professionalism of the department. Master Police Officer Barnwell shows obvious signs of impairment and admits to being under the influence of alcohol during the incident. And the incident itself, which includes Master Police Officer Barnwell's conduct and the resulting arrest, did negatively reflect upon the department and the city. Based on those investigations, I found that the complaint against Master Police Officer Barnwell for violation of Manual of Regulations 1005, which is standard of conduct, was sustained. The complaint for violation of Manual of Regulations 1007, conformance to laws, was not sustained. And then, in addition, I did find a new misconduct based on the original complaint, which was Manual of Regulations 1001.02, alcohol consumption by off-duty department employees, was sustained. That's a brief synopsis.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the board?
Captain, what is the nature of the violation in MOR 1005, or the 1001, the alcohol consumption for an off-duty?
Its consumption of alcoholic beverages by off-duty department employees shall not be such as to render them so intoxicated that they bring discredit to the department, or as a result of such intoxication are unable to report for duty.
Okay. At least from the victim, the alleged victim, had said that the officer drove home
Yes, sir.
from Pin Chasers, and he drove home first? Because there's a conflict in the testimony. The victim, the alleged victim, first said that he drove home, left her at Pin Chasers, and she was able to get a ride. From the officer, it indicates that he drove home and confronted the victim there.
No,
That's the way it reads.
He drove home and then the victim arrived home after that.
After that?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
But there's just a conflict in the way that this is, presented. Did the officer drive home in a city vehicle?
No, sir.
And the officer admitted to being intoxicated?
He admitted to drinking.
Admitted to drinking. Okay, but the deputies there indicated that he was clearly intoxicated.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and he did admit to drinking.
Yes, sir.
And then admitted to drinking, and it's implied that he drove home.
Yes, sir.
after having drank at least four, I think even in his words, 4 or 5 beers?
He had some beers, yes, sir.
Okay. Was the officer, was there any test taken by the deputies for intoxication at the scene?
No, sir.
Okay, I know that these were county sheriffs, Hillsborough sheriffs. What would a standard operating procedure be for a Tampa Police Department officer in a similar situation where they're questioning someone and the person is clearly intoxicated and has admitted to driving home? Would there be any kind of a field sobriety test, or? I
No,
know
sir.
that the person is no longer driving a vehicle, but has admitted.
No, he
Driving
was,
home.
he was at home for a length of time. He could have drank after that. We didn't see
Right,
him
we
drive.
just have no
Yeah,
idea.
We don't know.
Got it, okay.
You wanna jump
If I
in?
could jump in real quick, Captain Pat Mesmer, Professional Standards Bureau. For driving under the influence, one of the elements of that crime is that you have to actually observe the person behind the wheel of the car operating the vehicle unless there's been a traffic crash. And in that case, somebody else is able to, what's called wheeling, somebody else has to witness the person behind the wheel. We can't charge somebody with DUI just because they were
Right.
drinking at some point.
There has
and
to
we
be a
know
stop from an officer.
that- Or there has to be a traffic crash, one of the two.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Question, is that both for citizens as well as the officers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
Yes, ma'am.
either one of them, if they were home and that happened, they wouldn't be able to be
Yes, ma'am.
checked for that?
Yeah, there's no difference.
Edification for the viewers.
I have a question. I just want to clarify, just so that I understand. So it states here on your DA 80, the last line, recommendation is reprimand. I assume that's a written reprimand,
Yes, sir.
and removal from the Special Ops Division's motor unit.
Yes,
So
sir.
that in fact occurred.
Yes, yes, it did.
That's what I wanted to know. Okay, thank you.
Question, and Mr. Barnwell is still employed with the department,
Yes, sir.
and what is he currently doing?
I don't know his current assignment to you.
He's a patrol officer in District 1 right now. And just so the board knows, that is, and I'll go into that later when we have our presentation on progressive discipline. Removal from a specialty unit is a form of discipline. In this case, the motor squad, they actually get a good amount of federal grant money. So he took a significant pay cut when he was transferred off that
I
unit.
was gonna ask that. So that there was a professional and financial ramification to
Yes,
that.
absolutely there was.
Any other questions?
I have another question, well,
Go ahead.
too. So, in your findings, what really determined you to come up with that there was no clear indication that there was any probable cause for battery for the case for the victim?
Well, I wasn't determining probable cause on that. I was determining going from their two statements. In this, the victim basically saying the victim lied in the original statement when everybody was intoxicated. And then the victim comes into our professional standards and gives an interview saying that she lied during the initial interview. That's the reason I can't really determine.
For sure. Thank you for answering that. If the state attorney wouldn't have dropped the charges, would the outcome of this scenario would have been different for the officer?
Whether the state attorney files charges, drops charges, that's not taken into consideration when we determine if the violation of law exists.
That's all I have.
Just to clarify on that, for the state attorney's office to file charges in court, normally for them to proceed with a criminal charge, they have to believe that there is a good chance that they are going to actually win the case. So, and they have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So even if they feel that there's probable cause, they still will not actually file the case if they don't feel they can win. So there are cases where somebody may not have a case filed, or their case may get dismissed, or they may go into pretrial intervention or something, and we still will sustain that charge if the evidence that we see supports it. In this case, the deputies made the decision that night to arrest Officer Barnwell because of the statement of the victim. The victim said that he pushed the victim down, and that's the only reason he was arrested. If the victim didn't say anything and he didn't say anything, I would imagine there would be no arrest made that night because there would be no other way. So considering that was really the only piece of evidence that made the deputies make that arrest, when the victim went into internal affairs and said that the victim made the whole story up to get him in trouble, at that point, that whole statement has to just be thrown out because the victim admitted to lying. So now that is not a credible witness.
And the on-scene evidence of both the victim and Officer Barnwell having injuries, I don't really know what happened on there. Something did,
Right.
but we don't know what, and we can't prove either way.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just want to commend you guys for being able to read the victim's interview.
Challenging sometimes.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen, for the coverage of that case. At this time, for the board, may I have a motion regarding matters involving case 20F-145?
Kamaria Pettis-Knuckle from the City Attorney's Office. So just to as it's reflected on the agenda, it's stated that if you refer back to the disposition letter that was provided in this case, the items that were sustained were number 1005, standard of conduct, and 1001.02, alcohol consumption. So how it's reflected on the agenda, it's a little, there's more information in the disposition letter. So in case for a motion, there wants to be some specificity about, the board either concurs or does not concur and unable to reach a decision. Those are the particular findings based upon the investigation. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney. Yes, ma'am.
You ready?
Yes.
And let's move on whether we concur with the sustaining of the 2 MORs and the not sustaining of the third MOR, and also concurring on the discipline that was meted.
You want to put them all together?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to make the motion that that we concur with all three of the incidents, as well as with the punishment that was given to the officers, because we concur with everything. Yeah. The sustained, the 2 sustained, 1 and 3, as well as the not sustained, number 2, and well as the punishment or the discipline, I won't say punishment, the discipline that was handed to the officer. So we concur on all 4 parameters.
Okay, so,
I'll second.
okay,
I'll second the motion.
so Dr. Collins made the motion, and Mr. Tamayo seconded.
And then we'll determine whether we agree with your concurrence.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. At this point, we can further discuss. Is there any further discussion on this? So we're concurring with all 3 MORs and the discipline that was as a result. Okay? All right, any more discussion on it? If not, we can go ahead and proceed with the vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. The ayes have it, majority wins, motion carries.
Thank you.
Kevin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Let's see. Next on our agenda are the Community and Tampa Police Department matters.
Mr. Schmidt, I don't think that there was anything that we wanted to raise on that item. So we can, if we can just go straight
Okay,
to
to the
the
next
staff
item.
reports and business, and
Sure.
Captain Mesmer will go to the annual report.
Absolutely, thank you. So next on the agenda are the CRB staff reports and business. We have 3 items that we will review tonight. The first is the CRB annual report.
All right, thank you. Again, Captain Mesper, Professional Standards. So I have emailed the board a copy of the annual report. I don't know if everybody has received it or not. I've got my email up. I should be able to pull it up here if you'd like me to on the screen in front of you. Actually, I don't know if I can get my email on this particular screen. But if you need me to.
I emailed it to everyone.
Yes,
I provided
yes.
it to everyone.
Okay, so when I wrote the annual report, it looks different from the annual reports for past years, which basically were just a compilation of the minutes from every meeting that the CRB had in previous years. This one was written because there are certain specific items in the annual report that are required with the new ordinance. So that's why it looks a little bit different, and it's in the order that it's in. Because it contains everything that the ordinance requires. Basically, what did the board look at, what did the board address, what cases came in front of the board, what was the board's findings. There was a section in there about the number of complaints, and even though that just started at the very end of the year, I did put something in there about that. I added some information about who's on the board, even though that's not required in there, and just the main duties of the CRB as well. And then there was a section in there about the recommendations that the board made. Now, there is one thing that was blank is at the end, there is a section where the ordinance will allow the board to write a written statement. So obviously, I'm not going to write that written statement for you. So if the board desires, the board can craft a written statement, the board can have counsel craft a written statement, but I do know that the report does need to be approved relatively soon because we do have to go in front of city council to present this report within 60 days of approval. And Ms. Pettis-Mackle, I believe it is supposed to be approved, is it within 60 days?
Once it's adopted, we have to the board has to present it to city council within 60 days.
Correct. So just so the board knows, if you do want to make a statement that the city council will get to read, we do need to act on that relatively quickly so we can get this approved in front of city council. And if there's any questions on any of the sections to the report, I'd be more than happy to answer them, or if there's anything that you believe needs to be added, we can certainly discuss that.
Captain, just a clarification at the bottom of page 2 in section 1, that at the end of calendar year 2021, Irene Guy was still vice chairman.
Okay. Can definitely make that correction.
On the bottom of page 5, not the bottom chart, right? It kind of indicates the methods by which individuals approach the CRB with complaints, citizen complaints. And that's good to see, thank you. But if it was conceivably possible for a third column, and that is of the 241 complaints, it's not reflective there of how many came to us and we did anything with them in 2021. Is that knowledge known?
No, those are actual complaints. Those are not the formal internal affairs investigations that the board has reviewed.
Yeah, no, citizen complaints.
Right, there's no citizen complaints that came in front of the board.
Okay. So then we should take off total number of citizen complaints on page 5? Because I thought that was Are those citizen complaints that only went to TPD and not to the board? And we had none that came to us in 2021?
That is, the ordinance requires us to report on the complaints received by TPD. Now, my understanding is that there were no formal complaints made to the board. You know, if somebody was here for public comment and if they did not follow up with making a complaint to the police department, then that's not counted as an actual complaint.
No, I'm talking about the complaints that they would have filled out if they came here and we sent them to one of the 3 districts or online, and they completed a complaint form. And I can't remember in 2021, I know we had them previously, but when I was looking at that, I go, wow, those quite a few. But if those are citizen complaints that went into TPD, do we have any records of any citizen complaint? Or maybe if a category could be placed in there with the citizen complaint in the future. I can't remember what we had without going back and looking at all my minutes. But what citizen complaints that came off of the complaint form or online that was specifically the CRB. It was early in 2021, but I might be off. It might have been 2020 that we did have a couple that came to us.
Do you mean by this email?
Well, the thing is, I'm not too sure how they came. Because you know the form that we have that they can fill out and they go into the district office and the districts tell them. I know we had some complaints. I just can't remember whether it was early 2021 or maybe the last half or quarter of 2020.
Okay. I can look and see. We don't have, in our system, we don't have a specific way to check a, CRB complaint. There's not a box or anything. Now, if they wrote it on the form, we could go back and search that they came here upon request of the CRB, but if they don't write on the form that the CRB referred them, or they don't put that in their online complaint, then we have no way to know that the complaint actually came through the CRB. Now we have the email address. So if the complaint comes in through the email address, that definitely is something that we can now track going forward. But no, we don't have anything in our previous systems for how to note any specific complaint that comes in through the CRB.
That would be good if you could look at that and be able to, I thought I had one of the complaints.
Captain, could you give us some kind of a comparison as to how these 241 complaints compare with previous years? Is it showing an increase? Or is everyone getting restless out there? Or showing a decrease? What's happening out there?
It was actually about average. It's within about 10% or so each year. 2020 was a little bit higher because there were a lot of complaints that came in during the protests. So that year was kind of an anomaly, but it's pretty typical with a year.
Okay, any other questions?
I think I got one more, but I'm still looking for that form. And of course, I wouldn't have it in here.
Dr. Collins, you have any other?
Yeah, I have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just was looking for the form on the complaint. I happen to know 2 of them. We got some new members here, but I don't know if you recall it might have been in 20, when the young folks came here. And the reason I'm asking about it is the complaints when they come before us, they fill it out because we can't say anything if it's active or if it's not. And then we've asked TPD that when those complaints are completed and closed, that they come back, when they're gonna bring them back before us, that they notify those individuals that they are coming back. And those are somewhat CRB specific complaints. Am I?
I wasn't here in 2020, so I don't know what the procedure was in 2020 for complaints coming back in front of the board before the ordinance. I believe in 2020, it was the ordinance, the previous ordinance was the board could only review closed internal affairs investigations. They could not review anything else.
That's correct. So Kamaria Pettismacker from the City Attorney's Office. Captain, can you just verify for the board what year does this report cover?
Yes, 2021. This is the
And
21.
that's the only information that's covered in this annual report.
And this would have been 2021, and that's all I'm asking.
So are you, just to clarify, Dr. Collins, are you concerned that this data that the captain has gathered, that it's not complete?
No, I think it is complete. I think it's
Okay.
No, I think it's a nice report. It's just that when you did the citizen report, because we had some citizens that came here and lodged some complaints, and we had a form that we would refer them to go to District 1, 2, or 3, pick up that form and use it. I usually keep one in here, and that's what you get for cleaning out your book. and I don't have one with me. And we did have a couple of people who came here and wanted us to speak to them about their complaints. We told them we could not speak to them because they had to be investigated. But we did ask here that once those complaints had been investigated and they came to a close and closed them, to bring that results back to this board, but prior to bringing it back, to notify the citizen that lodged a complaint that they were going to be reviewed, let's say like in April of 2022, if they had been here previously. And so you notified them, they had the option to come when we were going to be discussing their findings, and you sent the findings to them. I can remember 2 cases, possibly 3. My problem is I cannot remember if they was in 2021. So when I saw all those, this is a complete. Those are citizen complaints with TPD, but there were specific complaints that the CRB referred citizen to, and they perhaps did them off of our form.
Okay, no, I understand.
I'm not saying it's not incomplete. This is thorough, this is good. But I was looking for another category if any of those complaints came before us. But those are none of the CRB reports, and if they were, they enmeshed in there, we don't know what they are. I know one of them was a shooting that was out in someone's home, and the other one was a accident with a truck.
Okay, yeah, I don't, when I looked through the minutes of all the 2021 meetings, I didn't note anything about a complainant coming in front of the board due to a previous complaint. If that happens in the future and there is a way that we can, note that, definitely with the email address, that's very easy to keep track of now. If there's a way that our software can track that, I can look into that and see if there is. But if it is something that would require a modification to the software that would be a significant cost to the city, I don't think the city would
No,
would have the funds to do
I wouldn't want them
that.
to do that. It's just that if it comes and we tell people when they stand here that we can't do anything, but we refer them and they come to you. In the past, they were going into the district offices and they were filling out the report that says CRBSI. It didn't have by 11 fold, didn't have hard age, and it had the board members' names on it, et cetera. And people would take that and fill it out and go in and they would help them.
But that might be what's reflected on the in-person category.
It could be, yes, it could be. It just
The in-person
isn't.
category might be there's no other way that the in-person complaint can be received. So that might be the instance that you're referring to.
Yes, if they went to the district with the complaint form and made an in-person complaint, it would be reflected in the numbers, but like you said, there is not a specific column of, complaints referred by the CRB. That is correct.
So that was that one. And I think that was it. My only one was the same one I mentioned earlier, so I will not repeat it. But under section 7, community meetings could be a good area for us to have a written statement. This is to our attorney. To just kind of talk about how we're willing to do those and how we want to be cautious in doing them. I had a number 2, a listing of the pending issues that be brought back before we were going to have that running.
It's on your agenda.
Yeah, I thought that would be good to mention because that's something that occurred in 2021 that the board initiated. And then the third one was on an ongoing basis. I didn't put the survey in here, but in the third one, I indicated that improve communication with the public with some form of media, how we get the word out that we are meeting so individuals will know, they can watch it on public access, and when there is no pandemic, if they want to come in the meeting. And that's still a concern of mine. It got very heavy during the protest time, and we were overwhelmed, and then people say, well, we didn't know you guys was there. I think they know that we're here now, but I still feel that public information is not out there, and so we're still looking for, if not already, and I know a section I saw in the report where our information is going out, but I don't know how we get this out to the public local media that we are meeting on the 4th Tuesday or whatever, 3rd Tuesday of every night here, and people will be able to look at it since they cannot come here. We do know people have to know, because occasionally they were going downstairs to, come and speak before us. So I still think that improved communication is a concern that I have as a board member. And those are three of the things. And under the improved communications about the board meeting and key agenda items when we're doing educational issues, I felt education, advocacy, survey, and things like that with what we would want to improve the communication on.
Kamaria Pettis-Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office. So before each public meeting, there is an announcement posted on the City of Tampa's website advertising and putting notice to the public that the CRB is conducting a meeting. It's there, it provides an avenue for public, how to make public comment, to encourage in-person participation. So that, I'm sorry, that information is posted on the website.
And I'm so sorry, I'm just talking, yeah, please forgive me for cutting it off. That's good, and that's what we know. What we were looking for is, how do we get that information out to the masses? Because everybody don't look at the city site. How do we get that out to the local newspaper? How do we get it out to upcoming events on the television stations where they will do that kind of information free? How do we get, when we do the survey again, how do we get that out to the community? That was a challenge for us, and we came up with a list of greater than 50 probably accessed in the media, the churches, the newspaper, the radio, the da-da-da-da. So we were on it, and they were actually announcing it so people know that we were meeting, and that's what I'm making reference to.
I understand. So the annual report is just an avenue to communicate to City Council and to the mayor what this board did in 2021. I understand, Dr. Collins, the concerns that you have on how to go about doing certain actions that this board has to take in the future. That's something that we certainly have to address and have to work out according to this ordinance that this board is operating under. So that's already been approved by City Council. But the purpose of the annual report is to inform City Council what this board did during the 2021 year.
And I'm agreeing with you. The only thing I'm saying is, we want City Council to know, when the public look at City Council, that we are still looking for avenues whereby we can communicate with the public at a larger scale so that they will understand that we're here. So even just a little note about that when you're asking us, and that's what I would say, because we've been talking about this for about 2 or 3 years. We activated it when we did the survey. Since the survey, we have not made that contact anymore. It would be good to let the City Council know that we are still working to that end, because what you're doing now and getting it out there on the city site, we were having concerns as to whether or not that was being done. So that's a good way to say that we've tackled that one, and we're still yet looking for other means to communicate with the community at large.
Okay, I understand.
And to add, a couple months ago, I brought up the idea of doing a community engagement committee. So this is definitely something that we can tackle moving down the road, making it part of our goals, that we are active in the community, attending events to get the mass media information out there. You know, we can't rely just on the media or in the newspaper and online system. So I'm a firm believer that we have to be boots on the ground out in the community, you know, sharing our message, reporting out to the community on our annual report. So we can add to our next meeting's agenda next month, the discussion of community engagement, so that we can come up with a plan on how we want to tackle that piece for the community.
Just to verify, are you wanting to, are you trying to make a motion to add that to the agenda for next month, or are you wanting that information to be included on the last page of your annual report?
No, since there hasn't been done anything in 2021 for that, we can definitely put in, make a motion. So I'll make a motion to add the discussion of community engagement committee for next month's agenda, so that we can discuss how that's going to look like. I know we're gonna need some sort of budget to buy a tablecloth, tent, print brochures. You know, we're out in the community, we have to print out the annual report. So how that's going to look like. So we can discuss that at our next meeting amongst all the members and share ideas of how we can spread the word of the work that we're doing.
So Mr. Valdez is making a motion.
I am making a motion.
Is there a second to the motion?
Well, based on the lack of a second, that motion fails.
Right.
Okay.
And I want to say this. It's not that I'm against going out in the community, but I think we have already been stated with our new ordinance that we've got to go in the community for 4 meetings. I did not want us to go beyond those 4 meetings. So if when we're going to those 4 meetings and we're doing that community engagement, doing things like that, I'm agreeing with you, but I think we are already kind of mandated in our new ordinance that we've got to go out there 4 times a year. And once we go out there, they've indicated, you know, we're not gonna have access to the people who do stay home and watch us on TV unless that happen to be in their community where they're going. But when we do all 4 of the communities, I would say in the 4 quadrants, however we divide it, under the single member district city council individuals, then I think that's when we need to make sure that we have our brochures, our annual meeting, information about what we're doing and letting people know. But I think on a monthly basis, we need to be letting the radio, the TV, whether it's social media, they need to know that we're meeting on I get one of the city meetings every month, and it comes out about a week early, and it's via email. And when we are not meeting, I go to their meeting, because it's another city community meeting. And I'm not asking the mayor to put our meetings on her schedule, but what happened with the protest was that people did not know we were here, as they said, and so that's one reason why we got such a slam dunk for 2 meetings in a row with so many people, because they say they didn't know we were here. We are here. How do we let people know we're here, even if they stay home and watch it on TV?
And I agree, but I just feel like 4 meetings out in the community, who knows if people are going to attend? When you go to meetings and whatnot, you have 2 or 3 bodies there, but if you are out in a community that there's thousands of attendees attending, I just feel the way to expand the mass media, per se, going to an event that we're going to host for, you know.
I agree with you, but I will admit, when we did them, previously we didn't go with the single member districts, and you may not have known that. We actually went with the 3 districts of TPD. The meetings were full. They were packed because we went to those communities, and TPD in those areas had them all to come, and all 3 of those meetings were packed with community people, and they were interested. They came. Refreshments were served by the people and TPD, but we did the 3 districts that time. Now we're going to the 4 city council seats. And I think what's happening is a lot of folks didn't know what we were doing because we weren't communicating. Yeah. So I understand where you're coming from. It's just that we're still trying to get this other one out there. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Captain Nesmer. Anything more that you wanted to?
No, sir, just, we would need to know if, obviously we can make that one change with noting this guy as the vice chair, and then if there is a statement that the board wants to make, that would need to be crafted, and then we would need to approve the annual report so we can submit it and get on the council agenda.
And Captain, that needs to be done within 60 days of.
Adoption of the annual report.
Okay.
So-
Work with us to do that.
Ma'am?
You can work with us to do that.
So, well, I mean, that's why we're discussing it. So the notes that I have documented, Dr. Collins, is that you want, more community engagement, or more, not engagement, I apologize, but more, community awareness of the board. That's the largest, that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from what your comments were, is more public awareness of the Citizens Review Board. Whether it would be blasting with emails, community emails, excuse me, or connection with media outlets. That's what that's what you're saying, correct?
Emails, yes, anything we can do that would improve the communication in the community, even to the point of just sending communications to the churches all over the city, organizations. It doesn't matter to me, as long as we putting forth that effort on an ongoing basis to improve the communication. And then you said the issues was on here.
I'm sorry?
I just was saying, in addition to the communications, did you have the issues on here that we were pending?
Oh, the continued cases.
Right.
The continued cases. I can reflect that.
11.
Yes.
Yeah. And if we could, you know, just indicate that we have a method now where we're monitoring and following up with cases, I think that would be good, because that's something new that we're doing. I don't have a problem with the community meetings, they're already there.
So, City Attorney, Eckel, so we need to, if I understand correctly, this recommendation that Dr. Collins is making, we need to then now, that's an ongoing action to amend the report that was briefed to us tonight, this annual report. We're asking for additions.
What I'm taking away from Dr. Collins is that she wants on page number 9, section 7, to include that the Citizens Review Board in 2021 monitors continued cases that they have not resolved, or there's
Right.
a monitoring of those cases according to the new format of the agenda. Additionally, the Citizens Review Board would like to, but I mean, that's something in the future about the communications. That's not what was occurred in 2020, you know?
No, it's not in the future, because we've been talking about this since we've been here. And we've been asking for it to be done. And what you say that you're doing now, thank you, that's something that we've been asking on an ongoing basis, that it be done. So you're indicating now that you're actually sending something out there to the city? Well, did you do that in 2021?
Yeah, that has to be, you have to notice, that's definitely done, because that's how you conduct, that's how you notice for a public meeting, which
Okay.
this is, so
Right,
that's
so that what I'm
required.
saying is, that's
always
great. What we're
always been
doing
done.
now is asking for increased communication or notification of the monthly meetings.
So that is, I understand what you're saying, but this is an annual report from 2021, what this board already did in 2021. So moving forward, we could talk about, you know, that principle of increasing the communication, but that's not what needs to be included in the 2021 annual report, because that wasn't done. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Not really. I understand what you're saying.
That's what this report, this is
I
what,
understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is, in
You want them-
2021,
you've
in
asked.
2020, in 2019, we
You've asked.
consistently asked, and we developed a list to send out to when we did the survey. It still has not been done. So what you're doing now is, what we're saying is, how do we get this done? And at one point, we decided to come up with a special position on the CRB, which would be our PR position. We didn't do it because they say, oh no, we can do that with the city. And we said, we understand that you guys are heavy loaded with work. We're not trying to overwork you, but do we need to do this so that we can push it out there and make sure that it's out there in the community and people know that we're doing it? And that's all I'm saying. So it's been ongoing. And whatever you're doing, our whole focus to the city council is to let them know, because many of them didn't understand clearly what we were doing, because some of the things that they listened to the community and implement in the new ordinance was things that we were already doing. And they go, oh, we didn't know that. So it's that lack of communication that is not letting people know that the staff is here on Tuesday night and the board is here on Tuesday night, and this is what we're doing. And it's a time to say that we're still working on improving the communication, and what we're doing now. This is what we did in 2021, 2022, we're gonna try to improve that and do some other things. That's what so I hear what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying. I'm still not. I don't know how to get it in there, okay.
Madam Clerk?
I just want to remind Dr. Collins also what that conversation was, that when we sent out the meeting notice to you guys, it was stated that you guys would send it out to the community of who you wanted to go out to get the notice out as well.
And we did do that.
That was stated.
Yes, yes.
So, have you guys been sending it out to
sent
the
mine.
community?
I do, I sent it to 2 places.
Okay, I'm just saying, that's
And
what we
those 2
stated.
places is one
when we
newspaper
talked
and my
about it.
church.
Okay.
And
So-
she's absolutely right.
So the way that I see it is, this report is a snapshot in time.
That is correct. This is a snapshot in time. That time is 2021.
Exactly.
So
That's what
that's-
our right limits are.
this is
Right.
your lane
I got
for this annual report is 2021, and the actions of the board. That if there's anything else you want the city council to know, that section is what that's city council, that we're required to notice these public meetings, that's already done. That has to be done in order for a meeting to take place.
And it's been posted, not just on the police, the CRB website, it's posted on the city event website as well. So it's not just one place. We have multiple places that we do put the CRB meeting on. Okay?
So with that, I'm trying to gather this so that I can craft some additional language to include in this section for the board. I'm sensing that what needs to be included is the continued cases, how the agenda has been reformatted in 2021. I hear what you're saying, Dr. Collins, and I mean, the board can make a motion about, and I would encourage that, the board to make a motion on what. Okay, so.
Collins, would you like to make a motion on the continued cases to add as a written comment on the 2020?
I would ask for a motion because this is an action that I would take on behalf, to provide that information in this section so that Captain Mesmer and the chair can present it to City Council. I would ask for a motion.
And Ms. Pettis-Mackle, could you please just restate that first sentence that you would read out from your annotation
That
on the continued cases?
that the board in 2021 modified or approved a modified agenda to be able to document cases that the board cases that were previously brought before the board, but they were not concluded.
So moved.
You have a second?
Second.
Okay.
So, thank you, and I'm sorry, if,
No,
yes,
that's okay, go
if the
ahead.
board could just vote on that motion.
That's
Okay.
a motion. I just
Do
so
we have
moved
enough
what you
discussion?
said, and we got a
I
second.
think we can vote. I think we've had enough discussion.
Discuss this before 21.
Yeah. Let's go to the vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All those against? Just waving your Lord's hand there. The ayes have it. Majority rules. The motion is carried.
Thank you. I will prepare this information to be included in the annual report for Captain Mesmer to present.
Okay, thank you. I believe the ordinance does require us to bring this back within 30 days, so next month's meeting, you will approve the final annual report with the corrections, and then we will present that to council within 30 days. But the ordinance does require it to be approved within 30 days, so.
Well, Captain, since you've already presented it, we've gone over it, I'm gonna just modify that and provide that information. The board can approve or adopt the annual report tonight because they thoroughly, as modified. Right.
Okay.
Do we need to make a motion for
Yes,
that?
yes.
May I have a motion for that? For the approval of the annual report with the stated modifications.
I move that we approve the annual report with the stated modifications.
Okay, second.
You want a second?
Second, Mr. Valdez seconds. Okay, I think we've discussed it enough. Let's go ahead to the vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All those against? The ayes have it. Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will be quick with this next one. I wanted to go over some discipline procedures and progressive discipline, kind of like the reasons why we do some of the things we do that are all based in law. So I have provided this document to everybody via email previously, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time. I don't believe in just reading a PowerPoint. So if there are any questions as I go through it, please, Mr. Chair, interrupt me, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Basically, three things that I would like to go over. What are the employees' rights? How do we balance the discipline with employee rights? What is progressive discipline? And then just a little bit about our disciplinary process and the determination of discipline. So employee rights are basically come from three things. They come from Florida statutes, the City of Tampa Charter, and then our collective bargaining agreement.
You see.
Should be. Can you all see it on your monitors? Okay, okay, great. Though it's Chapter 112 of the Florida statutes, which is the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, we also have a chapter basically that deals with all public employees, and then our union contract, and of course, the City of Tampa Charter. The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, you probably have received some training on this in the past, so these are the main points. There's actually a lot more to this. Basically, we can't go and call a day shift officer in for an interview at 3 o'clock in the morning. We can't ask them to go to Pinellas County for an interview. There are certain ways that we have to conduct our interviews with our officers. We can't go on fishing expeditions. We have to tell them what they're under investigation for. We have to tell them who's making the complaint, which in these formal cases, it's the chief of police who is the complainant, because the chief of police initiates the formal case. And then we have to provide them all the evidence prior to their interview so they can review that and have a chance to respond to the questions. We can't interview them, just like with criminal suspects. We can't interview them for hours and hours on end. We have to give them breaks. We have to interview them for a reasonable period of time. We can't tell them, well, if you admit to this, we're not going to fire you. We're just going to give you a reprimand or something. We can't give them promises. We can't make any sort of rewards to them for answering our questions. We have to record all of the interviews. We also have to record any breaks that are conducted during those interviews. And if they want to, we have to give them a copy of that recording within 72 hours. Just like with any other criminal suspect, if it's a custodial interview, if they're going to be arrested or if they are under arrest, we have to provide them the Miranda warnings like anybody else. They have the right under the collective bargaining agreement and under the statute to be represented by either an attorney of their choosing or of their labor representative from the union. Something called a complaint review board. The Bill of Rights also allows for that. That's when the officer gets to pick 2 people to hear the case. If there is a finding of discipline or a finding of a violation and there's going to be discipline that could result in suspension, demotion, or dismissal, the officer has the right to have a complaint review board. They can pick 2 people. The chief of police picks 2 people, and then those 4, they pick a 5th person, and then that group of people will hear the case and read all the evidence just like you get to see, and basically act like you do. They get to make a determination of whether or not they concur or they don't concur with the findings of the disposition of the case. The law also allows officers to sue for false complaints. That doesn't create a new law that makes filing a false complaint against an officer illegal. It basically just prevents an agency from having a policy that would prohibit an officer from suing somebody under existing statutes. Sir.
Captain, Officer Barnwell, in the case that we went over today, was he Mirandized before he was actually placed in cuffs? Because I'm looking here at if the officer is in custody subject to arrest,
So
random warnings must be provided.
So he would have been Mirandized at some point by the sheriff's office in the criminal investigation. So this right here, the Bill of Rights or the law enforcement officer's rights, it deals with our internal affairs investigations, our administrative investigations. Now, there are some departments, we don't do it that way, but some departments, especially the small ones, they may have the same person doing both a criminal investigation and an internal affairs investigation. So there's a separation between the two. So if it's a criminal case, then they're Mirandized. We don't get involved in that until after the criminal case is proceeded. Like when in Officer Barnwell's case, he was not Mirandized in internal affairs because he was already arrested and he had already been charged. So he would not be arrested again for the exact same thing. But yeah, he would have been Mirandized by the deputies that night
Right.
on scene.
That was my question. Yeah, okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, we have to obviously give them written notification for disciplinary action. There is what's called the 180-day rule, so that means when a complaint comes forward, we have to investigate that case and then decide what kind of a discipline we're going to impose on the officer within 6 months. Now, there's a list there of exceptions to that. There are a lot, especially if it's a criminal investigation. That's usually the biggest exception that we have, is when there's a criminal case. We don't have that 180-day rule does not apply until the criminal case is over with. And then the 180-day rule begins because we're not really supposed to do both concurrently with each other. It should be done consecutively. And if new evidence does come up that was not in existence when the case was filed, and we can reopen any case, even if it's a closed case, but it's we have 90 days to complete that investigation once the case is reopened. Now, also in the Florida statutes, Chapter 447 deals with the Public Employees Relations Act. Now, that is for every public employee. That previous one under 112 is just law enforcement officers' rights. 447 deals with all public employees. Basically, this specific statute here, it allows and requires that public employers can only take disciplinary action for just cause. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but it says we can discipline for just cause, and if we're going to fire somebody or relieve them of duties, it has to be for a legitimate reason. Also, this gives all public employees the right to collectively bargain. That's why there's a collective bargaining agreement. That's why there's a union, because that's allowed under 447 Florida statutes. And also, that's also why we have the representative rule, why an officer is allowed to have an attorney or a representative with them. Again, because all public employees, the same thing for any City of Tampa employee, no matter what department they work in, if they can be represented by a representative of their choice. There is also we have the grievance procedure. We've talked about that previously, about officers who get their discipline reversed going in front of either an arbitrator or the Civil Service Board. Chapter 447 here requires that there is a grievance procedure and there is a neutral third party that will settle that final grievance. That can either be the arbitrator or the Civil Service Board here in Tampa. Tampa Charter, not going to go into this much. Same thing. It says we can only discipline somebody, remove them from service for cause. It actually goes into specific things such as insubordination, moral turpitude violations, breach of the peace. Basically, it says it gives us examples of what these serious violations are that could result in basically suspension, demotion, or dismissal. Now, our PBA contract, this is kind of what goes into the progressive discipline. Again, that just cause is mentioned. We're kind of going in order here. Oral admonishments are the most minor form of discipline, goes all the way up to dismissal in the end. Payment for lost or damaged equipment. If an officer is negligent and they lose the radio, we can charge the officer through payroll deductions. We can, like in this specific case we mentioned today, the loss of pay and reassignment, that is specific to, that can also is considered when we talk about discipline. One thing that's not on here, because it's not really a discipline matter, but in certain cases with certain policies that are violated, especially if they involve things like substance abuse or other matters of concern. We do have the employee assistance program. We do have ways to require officers seek specific treatment for or get evaluated for certain conditions. If we think that there is an underlying issue that needs to be addressed, maybe it's not going to be addressed through discipline, but it could be addressed elsewhere. So that is something that it's not included in discipline, but it's also something that the department looks at when cases come up and when we're looking at basically imposing some sort of discipline on an employee. That is a secondary thing that we can also look at, because a lot of people will say, okay, well, you have suspended this person or you've demoted this person. Well, what is being done to help them with their problem? And that's something that's dealt with separately, but it is something that we deal with outside of the discipline world. So our manual of regulation, this is the progressive discipline part. Corrective action to ensure that the employees don't repeat the violations. That's the whole point of it. We don't want them to repeat the violations. That mentions employee assistance programs there, additional training, counseling sessions, but if that doesn't work or if the situation is more egregious, then the formal discipline will start, which we've already discussed what those are. And if somebody has a disciplinary history of doing the same thing, they're going to get more severe discipline than somebody who doesn't have a disciplinary history. Normally, when we have multiple violations, the most serious violation is the one that's considered when we decide to impose discipline. So Progressive discipline, while that is in the union contract, it is in our policies, there are certain conditions, including violation of the B-1-2 policy, which is the city's discriminatory conduct policy, theft, untruthfulness, excessive force, corruption, and while it says it's not an all-inclusive list, that is considered serious misconduct, so people can just be immediately fired, suspended, demoted for something like that, without going through the progressive process of giving them letters of counseling and written reprimands first. So anything that's considered serious misconduct, we can immediately elevate that to something else. And just cause, we've mentioned that a lot. This is a legal term. That's the standard that basically determines whether or not the discipline is justified. And this, there's also a just cause for the finding. But for the purposes of what I'm talking about here, we're just going to assume that the evidence has shown that the violation has been sustained, but we also have to have proper evidence to show by a preponderance of the evidence that the finding is sustained. So there's just cause for the sustaining of the finding, but there's also just cause for the discipline. So, and that's what I'm talking about here, where the discipline has to be reasonable. It can't be arbitrary. We can't do one thing to one person that we don't do to somebody else for the same thing, and it can't be too severe. And that's what an arbitrator is going to look at. I actually got this from the National Academy of Arbitrators. Those are the independent attorneys who act as that neutral third party in the final step of the grievance process. So that's determined, one thing, by progressive discipline. You know, has the discipline been progressive? If the discipline's not been progressive, very good chance the arbitrator is going to say that there is not just cause. Rule makings, the second thing, we have a lot of those. That's our policies, our procedures, our rules, our regulations. You can't discipline somebody if there's not a rule against it. We're very good. Most law enforcement agencies are very good with having thousands and thousands of pages of rules and policies, so we don't have an issue with that one. So we're always going to have a good leg to stand on there. The investigation has to be objective. You can't have a complainant also doing the investigation and finding that person, you know, in violation of something or imposing specific discipline. So the arbitrator is going to look at was that officer given or employee given a fair investigation. And then last chance agreements. That's something that can actually, I've seen verbiage like that on our DA 88s, our discipline action forms, where it basically will say, you know, future violations will result in more severe discipline. So that's putting the officer on notice or the employee on notice that if they continue to have disciplinary problems, they're going to get more severe discipline in the future. So those are the kind of the prongs of how we determine and how an arbitrator is going to determine just cause. And when we impose our discipline, you know, we always want our discipline to stand when it goes through the grievance process. Does anybody need me to go over the disciplinary process, or does everyone kind of know how that works at TPD? Okay, I'd save a lot of time with that. So the final thing in this, determining the discipline, how do we do that? And that's in our manual of regulation of how we determine discipline, the officer's length of service. That could be either a positive thing or a negative thing. Somebody who's been there 20 years, you know, maybe should have known better. Somebody who's brand new, maybe they shouldn't have, or it could be the exact opposite, depending on what the violation is. When's the last time the officer has been disciplined for anything? Have they ever been disciplined before? If they have been disciplined before, have they made any efforts to improve? Have they improved? What is the previous disciplinary action? So when other officers commit the same violation, what has been done to them? Because that's going to be one of the first things that the grievance process is going to address as well. You're giving this person a suspension, but these 5 people only got letters of counseling, so they're going to go back to the just cause when it goes in front of the arbitrator and say, well, this was not progressive, there was not just cause. So we look at previous disciplinary action for similar violations. And then finally, the intent of the officer. Was the officer was the officer unknowing? Did they violate a policy because they just were not familiar with the policy? Did they violate the policy because they were just being lazy and didn't want to do work? Or did they violate the policy because they were being malicious and wanted to cause harm? So the intent of the officer is going to be considered when discipline's imposed. And the chief's executive staff at our staff meetings, they will discuss a case they meet every Monday and Thursday, and part of those staff meetings involves the discussion of discipline, and they'll round table the case and they'll decide what they want to do as far as the discipline goes in that specific case.
Captain, who makes up the executive staff?
The executive staff is the chief, the 2 assistant chiefs, all the majors, and then the legal advisor. The public information officer is considered part of the executive staff. Usually, the public information officer doesn't really chime in on discipline. And I do work directly for the chief, but I'm technically not part of the executive staff. But sometimes if there's a specific question about internal affairs process or the investigative process, I'll get called in to explain that or to chime in on the discipline there.
Thank you.
I got a quick question.
Yes, sir.
On one of your slides, caught my attention, the word insubordination. What's your definition of that word? What does it mean?
Insubordination, I believe that was the one in the City of Tampa charter here. Insubordination would be when you're given an order and you do not follow that order. You choose not to follow that order intentionally.
So does it require a hierarchy and a chain of command sort of thing? Or could it be with like 2 peers, if you will?
Insubordination would require, I can pull the regulation up and read it to the board. But yes, it would require some sort of a hierarchy, for one officer not doing something another officer says, unless that officer is acting in the capacity of a higher rank, that would not be considered insubordination. Here's the MOR. Department employees shall promptly obey lawful orders of a supervisor. This shall include orders relayed to an officer of the same or lesser rank. A lawful order is an order which officers should reasonably believe to be consistent with the requirements of their duties. Insubordination shall include, but not be limited to, conduct directed at a supervisor which is either disrespectful, insolent, or abusive.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the Leo Bill of Rights, is that a state document or is that a TPD specific deal?
it is Florida statutes. It's chapter 112, section 112.532 and 112.533. So it applies to all law enforcement officers in the state of Florida and correctional officers as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Captain Mesmer.
Yes, sir.
Moving on to our third item under section 10 is CRB, community meeting locations. City Attorney.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. So when I came on board to the Citizens Review Board, I conducted a training. I think it was the second training with the Citizens Review Board. And according to the ordinance that this board is operating under, the Citizens Review Board must conduct meetings out in the community, 4 meetings based on the single district council members. So I know this is tough to air out with the board unless someone has some suggested locations. I know, Mr. Irvin, you had made a recommendation early on about a potential location for a meeting, but has the board thought about any locations for a meeting? If not, I can work with the council members' aides in order to get some ideas on locations and present that back to the board.
I think that's a great idea
Okay.
because the city councilmen kind of know their districts and where the people are hanging out.
I will work with the council members' aides and to get a better idea, come up with some options, and I'll be able to present that back to the board at our next meeting, hopefully.
Wonderful.
The year's rolling already.
I know.
So can we determine now that we would want the next meeting in April to be at one of these locations?
I respectfully, there's going to.
In one of the city councilors'
Districts. I hear what you're saying, so that would be great, but there's a lot of planning in order to get that done, so, The next meeting is April 26th. I mean, the goal could be made to have that first meeting out in the community, but there's a lot of logistics to work into.
Absolutely. So what we should do is look at these possible locations and make a determination as a board in the April meeting.
Yes.
To go ahead and hone in on that location.
Right, I will
In
be
May.
able to present that information to the board.
So is there any way, from a procedural perspective, as you're working this, in between the meetings, for you, as our conduit, for you to share with the group, like via email, some of the proposed locations for us to think about?
I could reflect that on the agenda of the proposed locations, and you could see that on the agenda, and then be prepared to discuss those locations when we appear together as a board at the April 26th agenda.
And why don't we do this? Let's get some locations for each of the 4 districts.
Right.
And we'll review the whole thing and make a determination at the April
Yes.
meeting as to
Okay.
where those 4 meetings are gonna be for the remainder of the calendar year.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I'll have that prepared for you guys when we get back.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, moving on our agenda with item 11, items continued. We are still monitoring case number 20F-148. Is there any status of that case? Captain Mesmer, you'd like to share with us?
Yes, sir. So, of course, this case was presented to the board prior to me coming into my position. My understanding was that the board was unable to reach a decision on that case, and this was under the old rules of procedure where I think they just were able to vote on the findings, not necessarily the discipline. My understanding was that the board had a question about what other city employees, what discipline was received for the same violation. This involved the officer, it was a black male officer who was saying using racial slurs against another black male suspect who he had arrested. The department terminated him for violating the city's B-12 policy against discrimination. And he subsequently grieved that termination, went to the Civil Service Board and was reinstated. So my understanding was that the board had some questions about the similar discipline with others. So I did have the Human Resources Department, and he's actually the only TPD officer who's been disciplined for that for a very long time, definitely within the last 5 years. But I did have the Human Resources Department pull some stats for the last 5 years about those. So I can share those with the board or answer any questions about that specific case. I'm not 100% sure what exactly the question was that needed to be answered in this case.
I think the biggest concern the board had was what you said earlier. Statistically, what we're looking at in the district. And I think it was an open case still, it was still being investigated, and that's why another reason they couldn't give us any information, so we asked them not that case, and give us some statistics. And that's why we didn't agree with, or we'll say it the other way, that's why we didn't concur.
Okay. Yeah, so in the past 5 years, there have been 11 employees in the city of Tampa who were charged with the violation of the B-1.2 policy. Out of those 11, 9 were terminated, and the other 2 were given suspensions. So the vast majority of them are terminated. There were several situations that involved certain circumstances, people of the same race using racial slurs against others of the same race, and those individuals were terminated as well.
And how many was terminated?
9 out of the 11 were terminated.
And the other 2 suspended.
The other 2 were suspended, yes. And I don't have a lot of the details of these cases. The 2 suspensions, though, one of the individuals who was suspended, and none of these people, again, were from the police department. That one case, that was the only police case involving the B-1.2 policy. So none of the other 11 cases, or none of the other 10 cases involved police officers. But the 2 who were suspended, one of them sent looks like a picture of a nude man to coworkers. And then another one used derogatory language, but not language that was racially insensitive. Basically questioning the coworker's masculinity. So those two were suspensions. The ones who used racist language were all fired.
In the last 5 years, right?
That's correct.
I have a question. Were they on duty or on the clock when that happened? Because I think the officer that we were discussing was also off duty, or was after hours, something like that. I don't know if you have the information or not.
Well, I believe maybe one of the incidents with the officer might have been off duty, but one of them was actually a juvenile who he arrested.
Oh, that's right, you're right. Yep.
So that we actually had that individual in the back of the car. So I don't know if there was another off-duty incident. It sounds like it wasn't according to this, but no, it appears that everybody here was on duty during this. I think there was a question, the one I just mentioned about the picture that got sent out as looks like a group text message. It doesn't say whether or not that
Okay.
person was on duty or off duty.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Thank you, Captain Mesmer.
Yes, sir.
Moving on our.
Well, just to clarify, with this information, can I remove that case from the agenda?
Yes, because we asked for statistics. We didn't agree with it, I think, and we simply asked for statistics.
Okay,
So in those listings, it would still be a case that we had that we didn't concur, but yes, it could be removed.
thank you.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 12, announcements and new business. At this time, are there any announcements or new business from any of the board members or staff?
New business.
I do have one last thing that I just want to address quickly with the board. At the last meeting on February 22nd, 2022, the board reviewed case 21F04 and wanted to make a written recommendation to the chief of police for the intent of the officer to be a factor to be considered when determining the discipline of an officer. I do have that written statement prepared, but I'm bringing it up now after Captain Mesmer provided his presentation. Does the board still think that the written statement is necessary based upon Captain Mesmer's presentation that the intent is, I'm gonna say element, that's just what I'm comfortable saying, an element that is considered for the discipline of an officer?
I would say yes.
That you still want to have this written recommendation submitted?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you share with us?
Yes,
what
let
your
me actually,
statement
it'll
is?
be easier to go on. This is the statement that I prepared, so obviously it will have to be modified since the chair is not present, but this is what I provided. Notating in particular the last line about the intent and behavior of the officers are factors when determining the discipline of officers.
I think that structure's been created. Just went over the report with Captain Mesmer.
That's why I'm bringing it up now.
That's why you're bringing it up.
That's why I'm bringing it up
I
now.
think this also goes to Captain Mesmer's, I think it was your last or second to the last slide when you were showing like the mitigating circumstances, and one was length of service, experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm trying to look into the spirit of this, looking at this, and then recalling what you had on your slide. And at least my opinion, my first take of it is, I think that's fairly inclusive, that captures that spirit.
Yes, sir. So, and the intent has been in there, and it always is something that the executive staff determines with discipline. Now, the board didn't concur with it, and that's the board's pleasure not to concur with the findings. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But correct. And if the board wants to write a letter to the chief and make a written recommendation, that's fine. But this recommendation, which was the request of the board last month, that already exists in policy.
The
So-
letter should be more of an appreciation than a recommendation, an appreciation of the department's move to create detailed structure.
So I know we discussed that we had a process in place and we discussed it in length, and the reason we came up with the portion of creating a recommendation is because of the severity and the details of the case. So we were talking about a case where there was alleged rape and there was an open condom and there was like all the evidence was there that it was rape, and the officer was trying to, and correct me if I'm wrong, anything that I articulate, but that the officer was trying to convince the victim not to proceed with charges and whatnot. So that discussion was more so the severity of the crime or the situation that was happening versus the discipline. I know we talked a little bit about the progressive discipline last time, and we all discussed that, yes, we understand the progressive discipline, but when it comes to certain issues such of that magnitude, that it's more serious things that others that may require immediate termination, and we're not saying that we recommended immediate termination, but instead of a written counseling, whether it be suspension or something of that nature, because of the degree of the nature that happened with the case that we reviewed last time.
Okay, well, that's something different than, that was not in the motion that gave me guidance to write this written recommendation. But understand with Captain Mesmer's presentation, there is a process on the discipline. There's a flow on what the discipline is for each officer. So according to the policies that are already existing, and Captain Mesmer can, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but there is a flow, and there's no provision that Captain Mesmer discussed with the board to just be able to jump to immediate termination. Is that what you're asking for? Is that what you're looking for, that clarification?
Yeah, but definitely, like, again, we're not saying that from the case from last month that we are saying an immediate termination should have happened, but more something more severe than just a written document when you have evidence in front of you that there was a rape case. Like, does it take 3 times for somebody to get raped to be able to hold a police officer, to a degree that's like, hey, on your 4th time, make sure you see that this is a rape, and don't convince the victim to not want to proceed with charges. So that's where I'm leaning towards when it comes to the severity of the case. Like this example I gave last month, there's a difference between an officer pulling up to a speeding ticket or a red light ticket, forget to turn on the body camera, versus an officer getting to a scene of a murder or actually witnessing somebody being stabbed and he just doesn't want to turn on his camera. So there's 2 very extremes of incidents that I feel like certain incidents should be taken a little bit more, not serious, because all incidents are taken serious, but the reprimand should be a little bit more elevated, per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that if I would have seen this presentation when simultaneously with the case that was presented, I might have had a little bit different perspective and reaction than I did last month.
I understand.
Because I can relate to the methodology with the just cause and the incremental discipline and the rationale behind that. And for me at least, that was the missing piece. And so being a reasonable man or woman, we're going to think certain things, and I think we all kind of agreed to that. Wait a minute, something was a little bit off kilter. But then thanks to Captain Mesmer's presentation, at least for me, that was a missing piece. And now that I see the methodology, it's not so much that the structure isn't there, but then as we all know, there's humans involved as well in the process when it comes to interpreting, implementing, executing, and all of that. So I think when you take it in its totality, having this presentation today, at least for me, cleared up a lot.
Okay.
A lot more of the issue.
So, this is based on the motion that was approved at the last agenda. This is the written recommendation that I prepared. Obviously, it's not submitted to the chief of police, but, if it's the board's pleasure, you could certainly make a motion to not, send this recommendation to the chief of police based upon the information that was provided today, from Captain Mesber, that this concern or this recommendation is already taken into consideration. But if the board wants to make a different motion regarding a different letter of recommendation for that particular case, then the board can so take that action as well.
I would move to table that letter, since it's already been addressed by the police department.
And I would agree with that, because that letter speaks to this, so.
Mhm. So that's a motion in a second.
And a second. Any further discussion on it? Okay, we have a motion and a second on to vote on. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All those against? Okay, majority has it. Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The new business is, I do know we have a new police chief now, and normally the chief,
Can you turn on your microphone?
that would help, wouldn't it? I was about ready to go. We have a new police chief, and since the new police chief is on board, normally the police chief will usually come by and do a brief presentation, and I would ask that some consideration be given to the police chief in her tight schedule to prepare to come before the CRB, so we get an opportunity.
So she was here last month?
She did come last month?
Yes.
Oh, and I wasn't here, see, y'all
Right.
should have said that.
Before she became a
And I didn't,
the
oh,
police
that was
chief.
before she was the police chief.
Right,
Now she is the police
She was
chief.
police chief.
right, she just wasn't.
No, she wasn't police chief when she came here, because the vote.
But she was here last month, though.
Last
She
week.
did,
She was here last month and gave a presentation.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
Good to
okay.
know. I didn't see that in the minutes. She came as the chief of police without a 4-2 vote, right?
I'm sorry?
Right, because the
4-2.
4-2 vote was
Yes.
just last week.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Don't make me come, she wasn't police chief.
Okay. Are there any other announcements or new business? If not, the next CRB meeting, as stated earlier by City Attorney, will be on April 26, 2022, 6 p.m. here at City Hall. And I'd just like to emphasize one last comment. If any board member cannot attend, please notify the city clerk at least 48 hours in advance. It's really important, especially with our tight quorum that we have here and the important business that we have to handle for the city and for its citizens. I appreciate it. Okay. Having not heard anything else, any last comments, the CRB meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.